السلام عليكم ورحمة الله
Peace and blessings of God be upon you. We'd like to welcome you once again to this forum. We do continue with the different sessions that are being convened in this forum. So the forum is entitled State Crisis and the Future of the Middle East. So this is going to be the third session of today. Does the Arab Spring, the session, Powers and Projects in the Middle East, is conflict inevitable? We're going to talk about the different competing agendas and also the position of the Arab world and also the competition with other projects. What can Arabs add to the region and the opportunities of complementarity between the different rising powers instead of clashes and competition for hegemony? And can the international alliances substitute for the international arrangements that might take place in the region? We'd like to thank Dr. Fahmi Houedi, journalist and former deputy editor-in-chief of Al-Haram newspaper, Mr. Khalil Al-Dakhil, former professor of political sociology at King Saud University, and Louisa Eid Hamadouche, professor of international relations and political science at the University of Alger, and also Mr. Ghalib Dilay, research director at the Al-Sharq Forum, and also he's a researcher at the Center for Aljazeera. He is a researcher specialized in the Turkish and Kurdish situation. And also we have Dirdiri Muhammad Ahmed, professor of law at the University of Khartoum, with us here today.
نعتذر بداية
We do apologize for the delay. So we're going to give each panelist 10 minutes. We would like you to abide by the time allocated for your interventions, and we'd like to give the floor now to Mr. Fahmi Houedi. So Fahmi Houedi is an intellectual, a thinker who is specialized in Arab and Islamic affairs. He graduated from Cairo University and he joined the Department of Research from Al-Ahram newspaper, and after that he became deputy editor-in-chief, and also he worked in Al-Arabi magazine in Kuwait, and he became an editor-in-chief of that magazine, and he has authored so many articles that have been published in different parts of the Arab world. He has authored also so many books, including Al-Quran and Al-Sultan, Taliban, and many other topics and titles, Islam and democracy, and so on and so forth. We thank you for coming. I'm going to pose a question. Is the conflict inevitable with the rise in powers? And we're talking here particularly about Iran and Turkey. So some of the information that have been mentioned by Uthman is old. Some of the newspapers that have been mentioned by Uthman, in which I used to publish my articles, have been censored. And we'd like to thank God for everything. This is on the one hand. You're asking us to abide by the time allocated, but we have seen that there is an issue, a problem with the time allocated to each session. So if you want to apologize for the time allocated, you have to compensate us at the same time. I was really surprised. I do remember in the 70s of the 20th century, one of the greatest scholars of political geography who wrote a book about the Arab world, and he talked about the golden triangle in the region, and he says that in the Arab region there is Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Syria. And in the region of the Middle East, he talked about Egypt, Turkey, and Iran. At the time, things were different, and this kind of depiction that was underlined by this great scholar was different because we had different prospects at the time. So the observations that have been written 40 years ago seem to be surprising now. At the time, Israel was the strategic enemy, and now we're talking about things that are different. We no longer talk about the strategic enemy, and now we talk about different kinds of enemies. Sometimes it is Qatar, sometimes it is Turkey, sometimes it is Iran. So the situation has changed. And there is a division, there is a great time span that has elapsed between our hopes and in that we had in the past and the situation that we have today when we talk about the conflict, whether it is inevitable or not inevitable. 40 years ago, the situation was different altogether. So, are we supposed to battle against them or not to battle against them? So, this is a kind of testimony of the dismantlement, disintegration in which we live. We no longer talk about Arab unity or Arab states unity. We're talking about Muslims, Copts, Iran, Syria, and different regions. We have transitioned from aspiring to the aims and dreams of the Ummah to the disintegration of the different nations or homelands. Even the concept of the state has retreated. We no longer talk about an Arab Ummah or nation. We no longer talk about whether there is a strategic enemy or there is no strategic enemy. We now talk about a quartet, an Arab quartet. And after that, we realize that this quartet is represented by Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and the Emirates. And those four countries, they talk on behalf of the Arab countries. So there's a problematic issue when it comes to the concept of the Arab nation, as if the concept has regressed, has retreated. I'm not talking about the Islamic State, I'm talking about the Arab Ummah or nations. So, what is the thing that can unify the different countries of the Arab world? And this leads us to another point. This collapse has led to a vacuum. And we have seen the expansion of all powers in that kind of vacuum. And we do blame ourselves and we blame the others and we talk about a conspiracy. It is not a conspiracy. There is a vacuum, there is a collapse that has taken place in the body of this nation. Countries have lost the components of a state. We used to talk about an Arab project. There is no such thing now. That is why others have expanded in such a vacuum. We blame them, but this is natural because vacuum would attract other people for them to expand in such a vacuum. And I hope that such an issue would not lead us to think, not to think about our project, which is the Arab nation. So I think that the Arab people are still in good shape, but the problem is the systems. So we have an Arab system that has led to the situation in which we live, and animosity and conformity and consensus has become different now, and we have a problem. And when we talk about the Arab world, we do concentrate a lot on governments and the different regimes that are ruling the Arab world, but the different communities and societies of the Arab world are exhausted now, and this has given the opportunity to the different powers to expand. We have seen in Syria what is taking place. We have seen the wealth of the people, which is taken advantage of. So there are two problems in actual fact. We have this Arab vacuum, and we have also the absence of democracy that has weakened and exhausted the Arab world. And maybe we can talk about the nation state. We do not have anything like that. We don't have a nation state. I'm not talking about the geographical kind of definition of the nation state, which is a geography and a people and so on and so forth. No, we do have a people, but we do not have institutions. And we have gone back to the phase which is prior to the nation state. We have gone to the phase of the tribe with all respect to the tribe and the tribal system. So we have a crisis which is a vacuum. We have the absence of a project. Also, we have a grave crisis of lack of democracy, and this has led to all the cracks and issues and brittles that we have, and we do not have any strategic vision. We have reached a point where we don't know who is an enemy and who is a friend.
أقل من الوقت أشكرك على ذلك.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fahmi. You saved us some time. You can liaise with us through the social media, through Aljazeera Mubashir. Mr. Khalid Khayel is the second speaker. He is a former professor of political sociology at King Saud University. He was a visiting professor at Carnegie. He has a master's degree and PhD in social politics, and he has a number of publications in different newspapers. I hope the newspapers are still going on, not shut down, in the Attihad, New York Times, and others. Mr. Khalid, Dr. Fahmi has talked about cracks and talked about vacuum. He talked about the change of the idea of the nation state. He mentioned Iran. He said it had encroached in Yemen. Why we've encountered the vacuum in the first place? Do you think that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states were remiss when it comes to understanding the Yemen? Yes, you are right. Undoubtedly, that we lagged behind and we allowed the Houthis to move from Omran to Sana'a for the last 1.5 years. And perhaps Saudi Arabia was lagging behind, and this is an index or an indication that is clear. Saudi Arabia was not rushing going to Yemen militarily. The military option was the last resort because the Houthis read the KSA's position as it were a green light to go further in their advances. But this is a part of the whole. Here we are talking about the crisis of the Arab state, and we've been regurgitating this for long. Do you imagine? Let me go back and perhaps deep in the history in order to understand the size of the problem. The question of the state or the governance was actually displayed after the death of the Prophet, peace be upon him, at the Saqifa. Who would succeed the Prophet, peace be upon him? And that meeting is famous, and the question in our culture is still there up to this moment. The answer is not there. Answering governance, answering the shape of the state is still lagging behind, is still a partial kind of answer. We have no full answer. And this is the extent of the problem of the state of governance in the Arab world. When it comes to the posed question, the confrontation with emerging countries, is it inevitable? Here we're talking about Iran and Turkey. If you ask the Syrians or if you ask the Iraqis this very question, then they will be laughing because the confrontation is there already. The confrontation is there. How could you pose such question? The Iraqis are clashing with the Iranian regime, and there is a bloody confrontation in Syria. And in addition to the regime, there is Iran, and even in Yemen, there is a clash. a showdown, a confrontation. Sometimes we might ask the wrong question in the wrong moment. Uh, Mr. Fahmy, and he was right when he talked about the vacuum that allowed such interventions to take place. Yes, there is a vacuum in the Arab world, a political one, an ideological one, a security related one as well. There's no doubt about this. But the question is as follows: why an Islamic country, a neighboring country like Iran, why would she be belligerent and exploit such vacuum as if it it is dealing with the Arab world from a belligerent point of view or stance? Uh, there are plenty of problems that relate to development, tyranny, education, despotism, and so on and so forth. And yes, there are plenty of problems. This is true. And we ought to shoulder the responsibility to lay them off. But n- when we speak about terrorism or sectarianism, the two problems that are entrenched in our societies, we can ask ourselves, when did they start? When sectarianism has become institutionalized, when sectarianism has led to civil war. Sectarianism is not a new thing. It is on a par with, or its age is of the age of Islam itself. But when it comes to the cultural heritage and the social heritage, this very sectarianism has not been institutionalized in the past. It has not become a constitution unless we think of the era that followed 1979. We know that Iran is the first country in the world whereby it defines its identity in accordance with the sectarian school of thought in its constitution, in all the articles. I hope that you would read the Iranian constitution. It is brimful of sectarianism. Article 13, for example, defines the Islamic State. What do we mean by Islamic State? Here we're talking about the 12 school of thought. The Ithna Ashari, Jafari, 12 Shiite school of thought. And this article is eternal, cannot be amended, cannot be abolished. This means that there is an overlap, there is a reduction of the religion uh, uh, in the school of thought itself. And this has been translated on the ground. Article 72, for example, stipulates the fact that the Shura Council cannot pass any regulation that contradicts with the official school of thought of the state, not the religion. Here we're talking about the school of thought. Article 115 defines the conditions of those who would become presidents, amongst which is the Jafari school of thought and the custodian of the jurist, the Wilayat al-Faqih. So 50% of the Iranians cannot be candidates. The time is up, yes? We'll come back to you saying, yes, go ahead. Half a minute, please, yes. So when you understand this, these articles have been manifested on the ground in Lebanon, Yemen, Syria, and otherwise, then confrontation will be there. Sorry for taking much of your time. Thank you, Mr. Khalid. Louisa Ait Hamadouche, she's a professor of IR and political science at the University of Algiers, and she's a researcher in the applied economics of development. He is a PhD in political sciences from Algiers, and she worked on the foreign policy of Algeria. Welcome, Mrs. Louisa. Mr. Khaled is saying that the confrontation is there. Do you think that the Maghreb countries are interested in such confrontation? And what about the Maghreb alliance?
الذي يمنع بروز قوى
Yes, you've mentioned, you've posed this question, and when I pondered over this question, I thought, would it be possible to have emerging Arab countries? I'll be brief. There are two variables here that we might resort to say that this country is an emerging one. The first is the economic one, and it takes into consideration the production line and the economic development, the distribution of wealth, the societal or community-based security, and the weight of this country in the market, how it affects the market, the international market. When we notice what the Arab countries are doing, we notice that the only element that they might be effective is to do with gas and oil. And even in these two elements, we notice that the Arab countries are or do not pull the strings of such industry. So any Arab country cannot be considered indeed as an emerging country. The other variable is the strategic one, and here there are some discrepancies. Why? Because on the strategic level, when it comes to weaponizing or having weapon or arms, Algeria and Morocco represent 50% of the African armaments imports. 50%. Saudi Arabia, for example, is the net importer of armaments or arms. Statistics says that $10 million per hour is the imports of Saudi Arabia. $4,360 is the share per capita.
ودفاعها. السؤال الذي يطرح كي تكون دولة.
So the question is as follows: what would we do with such arms? There are some countries that are interfering in some conflicts. The problem is when we notice that the conflicts whereby Arab countries are intervening, we don't think that there are solutions in the horizon. Syria, Libya, and Yemen have no solutions in the horizon, although there are Arab interventions. In Mali and Libya, these two conflicts are at the borders of Algeria, and as a matter of fact, emerging Arab countries cannot affect what goes on. When we talk about the inevitability of a challenge between projects, I might pose a question to myself: do we have indeed regional projects whereby Arab countries defend? Do we have projects that might represent alternatives for those solutions that regional countries are floating, like Iran and Turkey and other countries? What I notice personally, that what prevents having into place constructive projects in the region, or competitive ones, is the usage of the security dimension in a non-constructive manner. The security concerns do overwhelm our countries. Immigration, for example, is a natural phenomenon in such countries, and if we look at the North African countries and the sub-Saharan countries and the African Sahel, I think that the movement of humans is natural in that continent. However, adding the security element to immigration made it a purely security concern. This resembles the spanners in the work that the projects are encountering. So such progress on such projects are halted, and the initiatives usually look at the security element first and foremost. The problem here comes as follows. There are no alternatives of such projects. In the GCC, for example, plays against the clout of Iran. The northern African countries play the role of anti-French kind of opposition. But this has happened in contradiction with other countries. ASEAN, for example, has been established on the basis of combating the communists' clout. But they were smart, and indeed, opposing communism led to the ASEAN project, that is a splendid economic project, and such countries understood how to elbow aside the security dimension and to emphasize the political as well as the cultural dimension and the economic one. And thus, Asia has been burgeoning and emerging more than our countries. So the lack of such projects, constructive projects, relates to the overlap or intersection between the regional initiatives themselves. If I move to the Maghreb, as a matter of fact, there is the Grand Maghreb Alliance, and these countries stretch, extend the bridges with the Mediterranean dialogue and the Mediterranean unity, and also the P+5 and other initiatives that emphasize the negative competition between the countries of the Maghreb, and the result is the vacuum that is filled by other countries. And the third obstacle that resembles a straitjacket in the face of such projects is that the Arab countries emphasize bilateral relationship with countries outside our region. The USA, for example, plays a major role bilaterally with the GCC countries, and France plays a major role with Morocco. Russia plays a strategic role with Algeria, and it seems to me, at least, that the Arab countries resorted to alternatives of international projects rather than interregional projects. They resorted to alliances, and you've got 1 minute, yes, half a minute. So such relationship have been emphasized through the international dimension, the bilateral dimensions, rather than the interchangeability, interoperability of the Arab countries. Thank you.
The Louisa.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Louisa. We'd like to give the floor to Ghalib Dilay, who is research director at the Al Sharq Forum. He is also an expert in Turkish and Kurdish situation in the Aljazeera Center for Studies, and also he used to present a weekly program about the foreign ministry of Turkey. So Turkey is one of these regional rising powers that we are talking about. I do not know whether you agree with Mr. Khalid Dakhil when he said that there is a confrontation now taking place. Is Turkey part of this confrontation? And how does Turkey see the future of this region in the light of the alliances that are sometimes not well understood? Sometimes we find that there is an alliance with Vladimir Putin and Russia, and some other times we find alliances with other opposing powers. So the floor is yours, Mr. Ghalib.
Thank you very, very much. Before I go into the talking, particularly on the issue of alliance, let me just answer these questions. Because the issue of alliance, allies or the foes, or allies and enemies, is the concept is very much belong to the requires the existence of some kind of status quo, some kind of order. And unfortunately, when you don't have order, when you don't have status quo, the idea and concept of allies does not mean much, or the ideas and concept of foes does not mean much. I mean, just look at the Turkey and Saudi Arabia. Are they allies or foes? Well, look at the track record of last 3-4 years. Turkey and Saudi Arabia has been allies and foes at the same time. And that's why in this period, I think, when analyzing the region, the American concept of frenemy, friend and enemy at the same time, is much more applicable than the allies or enemies to analyze the nature of the relationship between the regional countries, but also the regional countries and international powers as well too, because right now there is a very dynamic situation, because there is no order, because there is no structure, because there is no some kind of architecture for the region, because the region is undergoing what's a transition period or interregnum, which creates so many negative externalities, and during which both the actors either try to maximize their gains or minimize their loss. The idea of allies or the idea of enemies are not very applicable. Even the concept of optimum in this process is not very applicable, because the concept of optimum, again, is like the concept of allies, require some kind of understanding and consensus and order, which is not in place in Turkey, and therefore we will have a very confusing picture coming from Turkey, and you will still going to have, is Turkey an ally of Russia or US? Well, Turkey is not ally of neither Russia nor US. Turkey is an ally of its own interest, and its interest, whoever it is that it can attain this interest much more easily, it will, very swiftly shift what you see as strategic orientation, but it's not actually strategic orientation, but like tactical maneuvers. What you see is taking place, because Turkey and Russia cannot go and cannot become allies for a very simple reason, because they have very different strategic visions regarding the Middle East. They have very strategic vision regarding Balkans. They have very different strategic vision regarding the Central Asia. The fact that they were right now working with the Astana process on others was because the Turkey and the US could not work. So it is a very practical and it's a very pragmatic approach, nothing else. But this process, the interregnum and transition process, has also shown us another things regarding the regional balance of power or the regional order. One thing, no countries in the region, no region powers will have a hegemonic position in the region. And actually, we are also over with the era of domination by the external powers as too. During the Cold War, it was very simple because you had the US sphere of influence and the USSR sphere of influence. This is over. You will neither have the US nor have the Russian domination in the region. And you will neither have Iran dominating or Turkey dominating or Saudi Arabia dominating or Egypt dominating the region. The era of regional hegemonic projections is also, I think, bound to fail, and the era of international powers dominating regions, any pretense of dominating region is bound to fail too. What this creates, I think, right going forward, this creates for the short period of time and further atomization of the regional order. We are not going to see some kind of a regional framework emerging. Instead, we are going to see a further atomization of the region because the previous structure is crumbling and because there is no new structures that is replacing it. And in this process, I think the three things is very much important. One of them that we often dismiss or we often overlook is the parity or discrepancies between the political psychology of the three major regional powers, the Turkey, Iran, and Saudi Arabia. And I think until and unless this parity, these discrepancies, this gulf between the political psychology exists, on the one hand, one power feeling that it is gaining, it is winning this competition. On the other hand, the other powers feeling that it is losing ground to the other power. For instance, right now, Iran feels that it is winning this chaos, it is winning this process, whereas on the other hand, Turkey and Saudi Arabia feels that it is losing ground. Until and unless we have some kind of parity and balance between the political psychology of these three countries, we are not going to witness the end of this chaos. Secondly, I think the practical aspect of the geopolitical sphere of influence, at least at the transition period, needs to be recognized. Unless this is being recognized, you are not going to see any consensus between major region power. The very simple act that Saudi Arabia will not accept the Iranian presence in places like Yemen or Bahrain. The Turkey is not going to accept the Iran's influence from the northern Iraq to northern Syria. Thus shows that the major region countries does regard some certain places as part of their national security and the regional power projections. And unless and until there is some kind of recognition between the major regional powers, in this respect, I don't see that we are going to see any kind of consensus emerging among these powers. And thirdly, the fact that right now we don't have a status quo, we don't have a regional order, we don't have a regional architecture, the major regional power also needs to compartmentalize the relations. There is no wholesale idea of enemies, there is no wholesale idea of friends as well too. On the Syrians, while Turkey and Iran will remain committed to facing each other, Turkey and Iran will have a very cold conflict, the proxy conflicts, etc. But at the same time, the solution, if we are going to bring this issue to a next level, to a political process, that requires some kind of compromise between the major regional powers as well too. So the compartmentalization of the relations rather than the wholesale is very much important as well too. So what is the question that's usually, and I was also asked at the beginning of the session, what is the Turkey's projection or Turkey's design for the region? Well, the Arab Spring, even though they were indigenous process, Turkey felt the Arab Spring was its own project as well too, a project that it can show affinity with, a project that it recognized because for two very important reasons. The start of the Arab Spring was about the political demands, not political identities. We spoke about the political demands of the people. Turkey recognized it, Turkey could associate itself with, and Turkey see some kind of future trend emerging, some kind of future structure emerging based on these political demands. And at this stage, Turkey strived to attain what was desirable at the region, what it saw back then as desirable and possible at the same time. And Turkey being major, usually, Turkey can operate better in a stable environment than a chaotic environment because for a very simple reason, because it's a trading power, it's a trading state, it's a state that it doesn't have natural resources, it very much relies on the international trade, it very much relies on the exchange of the goods and services, etc. It does require a stable environment in which that it can exert more influence. And when you look at prior to the Arab Spring, the idea of creating some kind of economic zone in the Levant, the idea of free trade areas between Turkey and the other neighboring countries, the idea of creating visa-free engagement between the countries of the region, the idea of population exchange, student exchange, that was more or less defined the Turkish project as well too, because it is a trading power. But starting from 2013, I think like Turkey
Can we
transition
wrap up,
from
please?
okay, Turkey transition from seeing what is desirable to what is acceptable, because it saw that this Arab Spring, with the coup in Egypt, with the militarization of the Syrian crisis, and also with the domestic problem that it faced, the Gezi Park protest, the Gülenist operation, it went for what is acceptable. And back then it saw that the nature of the crisis turned into more identity wars, which Turkey is ill-equipped to deal with. It's very much ill-equipped to deal in operating in a chaotic environment. And starting from 2015, with the Russian involvement in Syria particularly, with the fact on the ground rapidly changing, now it is going more and more for what is functional and practical. At this stage, I think I want to pose one question vis-a-vis the Iran. Should Iran be confronted as an sectarian power, or as a geopolitical sectarian power, or as a revisionist power, a revisionist nation state? I think this is a dilemma that generates different answer between Turkey and some of its regional partners. So I will leave it here, and then
Yeah, we'll leave it there.
discuss in
Thank
the
you very
Q&A
much.
session.
شكرا جزيلا. شكرا جزيلا للسيد غالب دلاي. المتحدث التالي هو الأستاذ
Thank you very much, Mr. Galib Delai. Would like to give the floor now to Mr. Dirdiri Muhammad Ahmed, a professor of law at the University of Khartoum. He got his PhD from Leicester University, and he was the legal representative with regard to the Abyei conflict in The Hague. Mr. Delay talked about the different questions vis-à-vis Turkey's vision regarding the Arab world and the vision of Iran and other powers. But what is the Arab vision in the absence of an Arab project? And we would like you to talk about the points of weakness in the Arab world. Dr. Fahmi Huwaidi talked about many of them, amongst which is the lack of institutions. We do lack real institutions. Thank you very much. Yes, I'm going to speak in keeping with Mr. Fahmi Huwaidi talked about. What makes the others do what they want to do in the Arab world lies in the weakness of the Arab countries themselves. That is why we should not blame the others, while the blame is all on us. And I'm going to try to underline in the following intervention a number of weaknesses in the Arab world in general and in the Middle East in particular. So this makes the different rising powers in the region not look at the Arab countries with respect deserved. They do not deal with the Arab world as a commercial or economic partner. They just seek to know the points of weaknesses of these countries, and that is why they seek to implement their own agendas in those Arab countries. When we talk about the entry points while dealing with this matter, it is either a kind of a populist or a religious kind of entry point. So when we talk about the religious standpoints, which is a kind of a sectarian nature, as it is the case in Yemen and other kinds of GCC countries. As for the populist kind of movement, it takes so many forms, either those cloaked with the human rights issue or the protection of minorities, as it happened in Kurdistan or in Sudan or in Syria and other regions as well. So the reason why such entry points exist, such weaknesses exist for other powers to intervene, those who are seeking to intervene, it is because the Arab nation states do not have the factors that enables them to have legitimacy and therefore stay in power. And this goes back to a number of main reasons that go back and date back to the establishment of what is called the nation state. The nation state was established in Europe at the rubbles of the imperial states and to put an end to the project of the religious state. And this what had happened in our Arab countries when we tried to build our nation states on the rubble of the Ottoman Empire. So that is why they put an end to any projects of a religious state, such as Al Caliphate or any kind of similar projects. We have started looking for other kinds of legitimacies to substitute for that historical legitimacies. And then they found similar kind of legitimate models, such as the one in Germany, or a legitimacy that would be taken from a family or from a dynasty, as it is the case in Holland or the Netherlands and Britain. In the Arab world, when we started establishing the nation states, we did not have these legitimacies, with the exception of Egypt, which has its own Arabism, in the Kingdom of Morocco also, because it is a long monarchy that has been established a long time back, in addition to Tunisia, of course. But the majority of the Arab states did not have this kind of heritage based on which they were able to set their own legitimacy while establishing the nation state. What had happened in the Arab world for them to be able to get a substitute for this legitimacy? Before answering this question, we would like to see what the others did when they tried to clone, if we may say so, a model of a nation state. We are not the pioneers of the nation state. It was established before us in Latin America. In Latin America, the people of Latin America, they found alternatives from the Portuguese kind of model in Brazil, and also the Spanish model, which is a kind of a comprehensive framework that has been established by those who have been established in Latin America. When the nation state moved to Africa after independence, Africa also found alternative for the legitimacy of the state that would make African citizens respect their countries as a region, as a territory, and as institutions that would abide by the different institutions and constitution. This legitimacy was established by the Al Cairo Declaration in 1964, which is not to touch the territorial integrity of countries, borders that have sanctity and should not be changed. That is why African countries, whose number is 52, have made advantage of this, with the exception of 2 countries. We do not want to delve in the details of those 2 countries, but for 50 years these borders have remained the only borders in the whole world that have not changed. The borders have changed in Asia, in Latin America, in Europe, but they have not changed in Africa, and this has become the source of legitimacy for these countries in Africa. What has happened in the Arab world? In the Arab world, we have found that we have the borders that we have inherited as a result of Sykes-Picot. These are cursed kind of borders that should not be respected. On the other hand, we have found that the countries that have been established as a result of these borders have been given what is called interim temporary kind of legitimacy for them to be the building blocks for the resistance of imperialism, to be a means to combat Zionism and also to liberate Palestine. And as a result of that, these countries have won what is called a kind of a transitional legitimacy, which is a means in order to achieve the grand dream of the Arab countries. And with the collapse of this Arab dream, namely through the Arab Spring, We have fallen into issues such as terrorism, and after the evaporation of any hope for having an Arab unity, after the evaporation of the Palestinian or liberation of Palestine, the Arab citizen has found out that there is no reason for that citizen to have any allegiance to his own state. And it was the citizen that has deviated from such kind of allegiance or loyalty. And we have found in many situations, as it is the case with through Daesh or ISIS, as it is the case in the place in Yemen or any other regions, we have seen Arab Shiites deviating or derailing from the pathway stated by the state itself. And we have found the same many other components of society rebelling against their own states, and we have found sectarianism and also other powers competing in order to find a place in the Arab region and to control the Arab region. So what is the solution in that sense? I'm talking here. Can you give the solution in 1 minute? I'm going to try that. In my view, the international law does not know a concept which is a state that lacks legitimacy. I think we should find substitutes, an alternative for this lack of legitimacy. The international law is not a kind of a exemplary kind of law. So countries have to find their own models, a model that they would call a regional kind of customary law that is going to be applied in that country. We found that in Africa and also in Latin America, and we find some seeds in Asia. But we do not have such a thing. We do not have such kind of customary law model that is our law. So we have to adopt a law that approves, that recognizes equality, which is a kind of equality between the different sects, between the different tribes. The international law and human rights law that we have and that we can lean on does not talk about equality between the different sects, between the different tribes. It talks about equality between human beings, but we need also equality between communities. If we do not have such a thing, if the different groups do not achieve equality with other groups, we are not going to feel respect towards the nation state that we belong to. So egalitarian rights between the different groups is the solution. So we in the Arab world, we have to try and work on that. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, there is no good in a person that does not see the application of justice to him similar that he does to you. So this right should be preserved to all communities. If these rights are not preserved and guaranteed for all communities, this is not going to be part of our laws. And in the book, we're going to talk about the egalitarian rights, and may the peace and blessings of God be upon you all.
شكرا دكتور درديري. سنأخذ مشاركاتكم.
شكرا جزيلا دكتور درديري. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, we call upon the different speakers to introduce themselves, and please kindly be brief in your interventions. May the peace of God be upon you.
الدراسات الروسية.
I would like to go back to the main topic that has been launched by the moderator, which is rise in powers, which was one of the main factors that had an impact on the crisis of the Arab states. And after that, we talked about Iran and Turkey. In my opinion, Turkey was and still is the rising, challenging power due to the sectarian dimension that is based on their own project. So this was a real challenge to us during the beginning of the revolutions, and also especially with the rise of a number of groups. And this Turkish competition has become a kind of a consensus, and they have reached a consensus with so many powers in the region. The main problematic issue that I really wished we could have underlined in the session, irrespective of the ambitions of Iran or Turkey, I would like to talk about the Arab regime and the trust in between the different Arab powers and systems. And what is the main reason? Is this why the different political forces have resorted to international powers?
نافعة.
شكرا جزيلا.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask a question, and I hope you would answer it. There are three regional powers: Turkey, Iran, Israel, and everyone has a central project. What are the commonalities between these projects, and are these projects contradictory, or are there some common grounds between Israel and some other countries, as some promote as if there is a Sunni axis whereby Israel is participating against Iran? Is this a correct description? Unfortunately, we don't have anybody from Iran amongst the panelists. There is a Turkish brother, a Saudi brother. However, we don't have an Iranian representative. This is perhaps a complicated question, but I would like you to answer it. Thank you. Wali Chusha, my name. In the name of God, the most gracious, most merciful, my question is as follows. Do we think that the crises are symptoms of the diseases that we suffer in our region? And why don't we have projects to salvage us from this dilemma in order to exit such crises? Thank you. Mr. Fahmi, would you like to comment? We just can't jump and talk about the region unless we have a nucleus whereby an exemplary nation state can be put into place. I mean to say that there is no civilized country that resorts to the rule of law and respects its populace and deals with egalitarianism and deliberation of power. As a matter of fact, none of it is in existence. We did not build the state of institutions, not the state of the jurist or the sultan or the emir or the king or whoever. We haven't started correctly. If we talk about the EU or Latin America, they have started with self-criticism, and then they pressed ahead with having into place an attractive model in accordance with the rule of law, human rights, the right of transfer of power that is orderly and peaceful. But we lagged behind. We haven't started the first step. Before building regional alliances, I think these alliances are fake. The Quartet and the Sunni alliance and so on and so forth. These kind of alliances do not build a nation. We can build a nation when we have a sound example that might lead to uh, uh, civilization. But if we have a vacuum, then the vacuum will be built upon a vacuum, and so on and so forth. We need to respect humans, respect the constitution and the law. We need to have a reconciliation efforts between the authority and the populace. The problem is that the authority in our Arab world is against the people. So how could we move ahead with such imbalanced structure? Dr. Dakhil?
وايضا هنا يعني اخذ فرصه اخذ سؤال من التويتر. اليست خليل يقول من
Don't you think that some of the GCC countries empowered Iran in spreading its tentacles because of the participation in the destruction of Iraq? Yes, no doubt the Arab state is the source of the problem, and we have perhaps a strong political authority with money and weapons and institutions, and the society is weak. So a strong government and a weak people. This is the debacle, and accordingly, the ruling in the Arab world is not a service; is a right for certain people. Perhaps the gentleman has talked about the lack of trust between the leaders, i.e., everybody is singing from a different hymn sheet. Yes, because the governance is not sound. If we had a state that is based on institutions, then we would have paved the way for reconciliation and consensus and so on and so forth. When we have consensus between individuals, individuals might become perhaps selfish and so on and so forth. But when the institutions compete with each other, then things will be different. I go back to the question that came through Twitter. Yes, the Arab Spring. Yes, the question is to do with the participation of the GCC countries or some of the GCC countries in emphasizing the clout of the Iranians through failing the Arab Spring and destroying Iran. The Iranian clout took place under the umbrella of the American. He meant the participation of the Gulf in the Iraqi affair. Yes, but the USA prevented the Gulf states from interfering in Iraq. What took place after the occupation, Iraq has been divided into three: Shia, Sunni, and Kurds. The Shia came under the protection of the Iranians, the Kurds as well, and the Sunni were left stranded. Egypt didn't interfere. Saudi Arabia didn't interfere. They were not. Uh, uh, they were prevented from participating. So who's to blame here? Who provided a room for Iran to maneuver? Who handed over the governance of Iraq to the proponents of Iran? It is George Bush, and it was complemented by Obama through the through signing the nuclear deal. And now the US troops fight ISIS in cooperation with the popular mobilization forces. What about the Arab Spring? Yes, the Arab Spring is a natural uh, uh, dynamism, and it led to a real change in the Arab world. And I think that what took place or was taking place in Syria will have huge implications on the region. because what's taking place in Syria is a genuine confrontation, a genuine bloody confrontation between the people and the regime and the proponents of the regime. And the costs of such huge confrontation and cumbersome confrontation is uh, uh, dire. There are no half measures. There is no compromise. After thousands and thousands being dead, and after the total apocalypse, and after the IDPs and the refugees, ailments, compromises cannot be entrenched. On the 6th of April, the last Thursday, Al-Assad, Bashar al-Assad, with a Croatian newspaper, he said, either we are victorious or Syria will be wiped off the earth of the or rather wiped off the map of the world. So the results of the war in Syria will be huge and will be affect our region. We'll take some more questions. Yes, please, Dr. Yarub.
في الصف الأول لو سمحت.
أريد أن أسأل سؤال ولكن قبله تعليق صغير. أنا لا أعتقد
I don't think that Iran and Turkey are emerging or rising countries. I think that Iran is a tool within a plan that supersedes the region, as I said in the morning, i.e. Europe and the Middle East. Turkey as well is on a par with Iran because it needs protection when it comes to its international affairs as well as internal affairs. The only power since its inception is rising is Israel, not in a self-centered fashion, but because it is a tool as well in the hands of the West. And the reason being as follows: the Arab Spring proved that the Arabs denied the foundation of the legitimacy of the state itself. Any state derives its legitimacy from its historicity. The Arabs were divided into two. Some of them looked at this legitimacy in the pre-Islamic era. Syria became Phoenician and Tunisia became related to Carthage, and Iraq became Babylonian. Egypt became a Pharaoh-related country. So these people took this stance, and I think that those who thought of such legitimacy, Iran and Israel, for example, thought that Islam might become the moral legitimacy of an ambitious project that the Arabs might play a role in. Thank you.
السلام عليكم أحمد عوض طالب
May the peace of God be upon you. Ahmad Awad from Qatar University. I have two questions. The first question is to do with the racial way of thinking, whether it is Phoenician, Moroccan, GCC, in the light of such
أتفق مع السيد الأول الذي تتحدث عن تركيا وإيران. أرجو أن تكون مقتضبا لو سمحت. نعم، من خلال مشاركاتي في مؤتمرات مختلفة هنالك هوس بشأن وجود مشاريع كبرى للدول. وأطمئنكم، لا أعتقد أن إيران وتركيا لديهما خططا كبرى، ولكنهما تعانيان من وضع فوضوي ويحاولون أن يقلصوا من خساراتهم، وبالتالي فإن تركيا ليس لديها مشاريع كبرى. إيران طبعا في عام 2011 كانت تتحدث بخطاب يقترح أنه يمكنها أن يكون لديها بالفعل مشاريع، ولكن تركيا كما قلت انتقلت من المأمول أو المرغوب إلى المقبول ومن ثم العملي، لذلك تريد أن تصل إلى أشياء عملية. أعتقد أن السعودية العربية وتركيا وإيران لن تخرجا مما يجري فائزات، ولكن نحن نتحدث عن تقليص الخسارة. هل إيران منتصرة في سوريا؟ كلا، نحن نتحدث عن هذا الشأن دائما وأبدا. ربما هنالك أمور تختلط على البعض، ولكن إذا ما انتصرت إيران في الحرب ما هي الخسائر؟ كم مليار دولار ستتكبدها تلك الدولة؟ أعتقد أن إسرائيل غائبة. نحن لا نتحدث عن القضية الفلسطينية، وإسرائيل تصول وتجول، وأعتقد أن هذه القضية لا تفضي إلى التوتر كما كانت من قبل. إسرائيل تحاول أن تطبع صورتها ضمن الأوساط السنية من دون الإشارة إلى فلسطين، وسبب نزع الشرعية عن إسرائيل في منطقتنا مرتبط بعلاقتها وتعاملها مع الفلسطينيين. ولكن إسرائيل الآن تلعب دورا في ميزان القوى، ولكنها لا تشير إلى القضية الأصل، الفلسطينيون أعني. ثالثا، بينما يخسر الجميع أو في طريقه إلى الخسران، أعتقد أن دول كبرى تتشظى، ولكن إسرائيل مرتاحة أكثر من أي وقت مضى. شكرا.
To have in one of our cities somebody similar to Sadiq Khan from a religious minority to be a governor or to be
وبمجرد تطبيق معايير حقوق الإنسان
or mayor similar to the mayor of London. So we do remember that the Arab countries were absent-minded when the criteria of human rights have been established. That is why these do not reflect our concerns. That is why we have to find our own criteria that would enable us to solve our issues and to find a solution to the problems that we are facing. Mr. Fahmy, we would like to conclude with a word by you. Louisa said that we are against Iran, against Turkey, against this and that, but there is no other alternative. So how possibly can we find an alternative? And what are the traits of these alternatives or attributes of this alternative? So you're pushing me to say things that I refrained from saying in this intervention. So there are things that we posed as if they are postulates when it comes to animosities against Iran or Turkey. So before 1979, what was the relationship like between the GCC and Iran? It was an excellent relationship. And the relationship between Turkey and Egypt. Now there is a war, a media war between the two countries. But before the Muslim Brotherhood came into power and Turkey's leaning and being partial to them, we didn't have such a problem. We have created our own issues and we are fighting these issues, and we found and we left our own homes facing problems. We went to fight into other territories and battlefields while our own countries and issues are not being solved. So we didn't have these issues before. We didn't have such problems before. These are political differences and disparities in the first place. Jamal Abdel Nasser disagreed with Iran, disagreed with Turkey. It was neither a sectarian or a creedal kind of issue at the time. And when we talk about a country such as Egypt, that used to be described as a Shiite country in essence, but it wasn't like that. Due to the fact that this issue has a particularity in some GCC countries, and some GCC countries are managing the scene, and because of the power of money, and money exists in the GCC countries, and it is the language of money that prevails now. So I think the sound of the director is now higher than. So the TV director wants me to end this session. I think his voice is louder now. There are things that we disagree on, of course, with all respect to all the speakers, with all respect to all of them. So these are not only postulates, no. They should not be taken for granted. They are worthy of discussion. They should be discussed. Each one of us should express himself from his or her standpoint. My brother, Dr. Khalid Dakhil, I do respect your opinions, but the issue of Shia in Saudi Arabia is a sectarian issue in the first place. And all my friends and brothers in Saudi Arabia disagree with me. And I did criticize the Saudi Arabian regime because they intervene in the Yemeni situation. So we should not deal with situations and take them for granted. There are things that are subject to discussion and should be discussed. But in the Arab world, they have different maps. So the Grand Maghreb is outside this battlefield that is taking place. So you did ask me, and now you're stopping me. Have I volunteered, or did you ask me? Really, I do enjoy the discussion with you, and I would like to thank you very much. I am sure Mr. Khalid, Dr. Khalid would want to comment. So the discussion has become very much heated at the end. I was really silent. I kept silent, but we are going to have the sign-in ceremony of Dr. Dardiri's book, African Borders and Secession International Law by Dardiri Muhammad Ahmed. And we're going to have another session, Youth and the Crisis of the Arab States, which is organized by the Aljazeera Net. And also in the gala dinner, we're going to have an intervention by Dr. Mustafa Sawag and also a speech by former British Ambassador Craig Murray. Anyway, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Fahmi Huwaidi, Khalid Al-Dakhil, Louisa Damouche, Direct Dardiri, Mohammed, Mr. Galib Delay. I would like to thank you all for your intervention.